Film thrives outside of the sterility of digital images. Film grain dances with subjects, weeps with tragedies, aligns with architecture, and absorbs the character and emotion of a scene like a sentient, emotive mirror. If you're looking to step cautiously into medium format from 35 or digital, there are many worse places to start looking than the 645 N2, and only a few that are better. Stepping into a 645 N2 from any other camera system is no more difficult than walking from a sidewalk to a patio. A few short steps and you're there, ready to knock on the door and see what's behind it waiting for you. The 645 N2 feels like a standard SLR, not a medium format camera, and not a professional grade body. Now that's both good and bad, and it's meant to be taken both well and not. The 645 N2 sports serious capabilities, and it feels like a K3 or really any other recent Pentax APS-C DSLR, both in terms of size and weight. The 645 N2 isn't meaningfully larger than a DSLR with a lens on it, and that's shocking given that the 645 is a medium format camera. The 645 also isn't a whole lot heavier until you load it with the 6 AA batteries that it needs to operate. I opened the last paragraph saying that this camera's feel is both good and bad. And there are a few things about the 645 N2 that I've really grown to not enjoy. Now, first among those is the 92% frame coverage, which is on par with upper mid-range SLRs, maybe just mid-range SLRs in some cases, and it is not comparable to pro-range SLRs. I recognize that making a prism for a 645 format that magnifies at 0.75% like this one's does and has 100% frame coverage would be exceedingly hard and expensive and possibly even impossible to align perfectly in the camera. But 92% frame coverage is a lot of slop and a lot of framing surprise when the film comes back. 95% would have been good, 98% would have been better. I'm also not a huge fan of how the 645 N2's ISO is adjusted, and a better option would have been for the shutter speed dial to be a simple up-down control for ISO instead of using the arrow buttons. The ISO interface, as well as a few other interface elements, feel like a response to competitor interface approaches and not design elements that Pentax thought about and approached in a way that made that element their own creation or better than what the competitors were doing. Elements on the 645 N2 like that don't feel like the refined Pentax interface elements that most Pentax generations had, but instead some of those interface elements, the ISO being one of them, feel hasty and only partially thought through. With ISO changes, this weakness is most stark. Changing ISO is something that the user will likely do often, and because it has to be done with potentially every roll, this interface is a significant pain. A good way to minimize that pain is to shoot blocks of the same ISO and only change the setting infrequently. Another feature that I'm not fond of, or perhaps an absent feature that I wish were present would be a better way of saying this, and you'll hear this criticism from me on other Pentax medium format camera reviews, is that the film back on this camera is not mid-roll interchangeable. This differentiates the 645 from competing Mamiya systems that allowed film backs to be switched during a roll. And that's one of my favorite features about the RB67 and RB67 Pro S, Hasselblad 500 series, and a few others. Now, I recognize that the 645 N series has a different interface theory than the RBs and others that I mentioned, and interchangeable back medium format cameras don't work in the same way that the 645s do, but being able to change films mid-roll is a good reason to get a professional grade medium format camera, and the 645 series simply lacks that capacity. Lest you think I'm going to just break bad on the 645 N2, I'm not. The camera has a lot of strengths, and many of which outweigh the weaknesses that I've just talked about. The 645 N2 has an autofocus that, for its time, format, and the sheer mass of glass and metal that has to be moved, was and still is stunningly quick and accurate. The auto wind for the film is fast and accurate. It doesn't misalign images, and the auto wind moves film through the camera like a cadence through poetry, kinetic energy through billiard balls. Click, stop, move, click, align, align, align. It's a very well-designed system to move film. The meter. Wow. The meter sees light in more than sufficient detail to provide accurate and well-exposed images. Coupled with the 645 N2's hyper-accurate aperture priority and program mode stepless shutter, the 645 N2, especially in aperture priority mode, affords the user assurance of exposures as accurate as a skilled surgeon's scalpel placement. And while I listed what I'm about to say as a detraction earlier, it's also a positive to say that the camera feels like a Pentax DSLR in the hand. The 645 N2 feels instantly familiar to Pentax users, though a few buttons have different functions, and those differences can lead to some minor confusion, but overall, if you're familiar with Pentax, this camera has a learning curve that can be measured in Planck time. And there's another huge advantage to this system over a number of other medium format system options. The 645 mount is a live mount still supported by Pentax in their thriving medium format DSLR lineup. If you have or would like to get a 645D or Z, you can use the same lenses on this camera as those and vice versa. Now, for a professional kit, having a film option that uses the same lenses as a digital kit gives you some opportunities as a photographer to offer some unique film-based client services for what is really a minimal startup cost. The Pentax 645 line is a perennial favorite for wedding photographers, fashion photographers, landscape photographers very much so, and basically any other type of professional photographer. And what a great time in photography to be able to say, I'll bring a couple rolls of film. I'll be able to create that warm, bright, natural look that film offers and that digital can't truly match. This is where the 645 N2 sets itself apart from any competition. In late 2016's market, you can have one of these camera bodies for about the cost of a mid-range DSLR. For that same cost, you can have a medium format camera option. The characteristic beauty of 645 lenses, the way they render subjects and light, the stunning subject isolation delivered by 645 focal lengths. And if you are considering this camera or a DSLR, give very serious consideration to film. Your imagery will, by simple optical physics, have a much higher ceiling in medium format compared to APS-C.